Now it's time for the weekly news update. I'm here with Reload founder Steve Gutowski. How are you today, Steve?
I'm doing good. How are you, Jake?
I'm doing well. Always
our contributing writer.
That's right. Always happy to be on the podcast and talking to the readers and listeners. You had a big story today, big new development in the permitless carry frontier. A new state just became a permitless carry state. Is that right?
Yeah, Ohio just adopted permitless carry. Governor DeWine signed it into law, and now they're the 23rd state to adopt the policy. And I think we're on the road now to 25 soon. Georgia and Indiana might be coming up here soon, really within the next month or so, because their legislative sessions are going on as well. But yeah, the governor signed the bill. He didn't put out any statement. His office told me they didn't have any further comment on it, so I guess he's not making it a big deal out of it. But obviously, a lot of gun rights activists certainly are. This is the policy. It's often called constitutional carry by gun rights advocates, of course, and it allows anyone over the age of 21 who can legally own a gun to legally carry it on them concealed without a permit. And now you've seen this become the most popular gun carry regulation in the country. It's past shall issue, where where there's still a permit, but if you go through the process, you are entitled to receive the permit. They shall issue it to you. They can't, decide not to if you pass the background check and complete the training. That's I believe that's 20 states now, because the permitless carry is chipping away at what used to be shall issue states. And then you had may issue, right, which is the policy that's being challenged at the Supreme Court right now out of New York, which says that if you can go through those same steps of obtaining the required training and passing the background check, but you also have to prove you have a good need to carry a gun, which generally means that in the end, it's up to the government official as to whether or not they want to issue you a permit. They may issue you one, but they do not have to. And generally, that means that most people are not eligible for concealed carry permits in may issue states. Only people who can prove they have a special need beyond regular self-defense. So we're seeing that's probably going to be wiped out by the Supreme Court. We'll see how they rule. We've talked a lot about this in the past, but now you're seeing, without any court rulings, permitless carry become more and more popular, right? I mean, you actually, Jake, you had a really good analysis piece about how far things have come, right?
Yeah, that's right. As you pointed out, it's a pretty big deal that now permitless carry is the most common carry regime in the country. It surpassed shall issue, as you said. Because, just less than 40 years ago, you say 1986, that's the year before Florida adopted the shall issue carry regime that kind of spurred the nation to gradually over time fall in line, and virtually almost every state, minus those few holdouts that retained may issue, adopted that policy. But back then there was just one state with permitless carry, and that was Vermont, which has had the policy since its founding. That's why, it used to be kind of called by a nickname Vermont carry. Right. The policy, because that was just the only state that had that option. And at the time, there were only 8 shall issue states. So it wasn't particularly common to have a pretty liberal carry regime. And now, the year 2022, you've got 23 states that have permitless carry. I think you said 20, either 19 or 20 shall issue, and those remaining 8 may issue states that could very well, at any moment when the Supreme Court rules, could become shall issue. So it's been a big transition in just a generation.
Yeah, and even DC now is shall issue,
right?
After their total ban on concealed carry was struck down by a federal judge, and then later on their may issue law was also struck down just a couple years later, and so now their shall issue. I think you're poised to see shall issue be the floor across the country, and then permitless carry will probably be the preferred policy of every red state, I would say. Every
right.
state that has the triple red, the House, the Senate, and the governor, all controlled by Republicans, it's hard to imagine a future where all of those states don't eventually move to permitless carry, and probably within the next year or two. I mean, there's only a couple holdouts left, really. I think that's what, like, well, there's Georgia and Indiana, which are considering it right now, and might have it in law by the end of this month or maybe next month. Then you've got Florida, which you've had Ron DeSantis, the governor there, has expressed support for it, although I think it hasn't made any significant progress in the legislature this year.
Yeah.
But and then you have South Carolina, I think Nebraska, and so you're even if those states don't get to it this year, it's going to become increasingly difficult to avoid that pressure if you're the last red state that doesn't have permitless carry, right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think Ohio in this case is actually a pretty big indicator for that kind of trend because, as you said, Ohio is a triple red state, but it's not super red. It elects Democrats, and for a long time it was considered a swing state. And Governor Mike DeWine, while he did sign the bill, has kind of been straddling the fence on the gun issue in the past. He's voiced support for some gun control policies in the past, especially after that Dayton mass shooting a couple of years ago. He was open to expanding background checks and that sort of thing. So the fact that such a policy can pass in a state like that, which is now the second most populous state behind Texas to have this policy, I think it's a big deal, a big indicator, and I think it will cause other red states to kind of fall in line because they don't have the same impediments that a state like Ohio does.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, too, because, the policy doesn't poll that well. I think you see limited support for this when you get polling questions that ask about it. But it's one of those issues where it seems perhaps the people who do care about it are very passionate about it. And the people who might say they don't prefer it on a polling question just aren't that interested or aren't that concerned about it unless it leads to like observable negative outcomes that can reasonably be blamed on the policy, which I don't think we've really seen that yet. I haven't seen a politician get recalled because they voted for permitless carry anywhere, right? Like that's not something that's really happened. I don't even think you've seen like a concerted effort to do something like that. Obviously, you have a lot of people who are organized against these policies. The gun control groups universally are opposed to permitless carry. You had, I believe, for Ohio, you had this is Christine Woodworth, who's a volunteer for the Ohio chapter of Moms Demand Action. This was put out by, Moms Demand Action was part of Everytown. She said, today Governor DeWine sided with the gun lobby over public safety, over the safety of Ohio's law enforcement officers who work every day to protect our community. Our state has some of the weakest gun laws in the country, and today we lost one of the last foundational public safety measures on the books for no reason other than to satisfy the gun lobby. So that's how you'll hear them talk about this policy. But I don't know that that's led to any sort of significant action against those who've voted in favor of it. Now, to be fair, this has been an extremely quick rise to prominence for permitless carry, as your piece laid out. So maybe a backlash will come at some point if people, associate rising, murder rates with these policies. But to this point, that certainly hasn't happened, and I'm not sure it's going to, right?
Right. Yeah, it's possible, but I'm with you. I'm not sure it's going to happen. I think a good example of that is a state like Vermont, who has had it since its founding, but it's also been a deep blue state for, for almost forever now. And you haven't seen any effort to get rid of that policy there. And likewise, any of the other states that have adopted permitless carry, which obviously are much more recent in the grand scheme of things, but there hasn't been any repeal of the policy in any state that has passed it. So while there is upfront opposition from, gun control groups, sometimes law enforcement groups, you never really see the permitless carry policy get repealed. So
that's a great point.
I don't know if it'll happen in the future.
That's a very good point. You haven't seen any states move from permitless in the other direction ever. So
right.
We'll keep an eye on this and see where it ends up. Of course, over at the Reload,